everyone, John Lorden here. Welcome to another episode of Brain Scratch Case Cracked, this one being recorded for May 1st, 2018. Is this possibly the biggest case to be cracked this year? I know it's kind of early in the year, but when you hear the details of this case and knowing that it went on for over 4 decades without being solved, this might be one of the most important case cracks that we've discussed yet. We are talking about the case of the East Area Rapist, also known as the original Night Stalker, also known as the Diamond Knot Killer, also known as the Golden State Killer, and quite possibly also the Visalia Ransacker. I know, a lot of monikers for one person, but let's go ahead and jump into the details here. It was Detective Paul Hull's last day of active service. He had looked into the East Area Rapist case for over 2 decades, and he spent time during his final day sitting in front of the home of one of the persons of interest. Should he just walk up to the door and start a conversation, maybe ask for his DNA? If he was correct, the man could have been responsible for killing at least 12, raping more than 50 women, and even shooting at a cop during a police chase in 1975. Paul decides to drive away, but the mystery of who is the East Area Rapist would quickly be headed to its conclusion. Hulls would continue to consult on the case after his retirement and take steps that some people say could risk the prosecution of the East Area Rapist when it goes to trial. The East Area Rapist, or EAR, started his crime spree in the mid-70s. However, there's some new information coming out now that he might also have been a home burglar called the Visalia Ransacker earlier that decade. The EAR typically wore a ski mask and carried a gun. He had sandy hair and possibly blue eyes, stood almost 6 feet tall, and wore a size 9 shoe. He would typically break in through a window or a sliding glass door. He tied up his victims. Sometimes, if a man was in the home, he would be tied up and kept in another room. The EAR would put dinner plates on his body and told the man if he heard the plates rattle, everyone would be killed. In one case, he did the same to a mother as he raped her 13-year-old daughter. His tactical precision had some people wondering if he had military or law enforcement experience. He would also take mementos, photographs, jewelry, other small items from the homes. Occasionally, he would steal cash and guns. He would sometimes stay at the home for a prolonged period of time, even occasionally raiding the fridge. Though a solid connection hasn't been established yet, the Visalia Ransacker would also place dishes in hallways and near doors to let him know if someone was coming, and stood at 5'10", also wearing a size 9 shoe. There's also a very good chance that he killed a journalism professor. In 1977, a poem was sent to a local paper, television station, and the mayor of Sacramento that was signed, quote, "Your East Area Rapist." However, it's still unknown if it was legitimate. Later that year, several phone calls were made to local authorities saying that they were the EAR, and those calls coincided with attacks on more victims occurring on the same day as those phone calls. He even once called a previous victim saying, "Merry Christmas, it's me again." And in one case, he called a victim before he actually attacked them to let them know that he was going to do that to them. Local residents in Sacramento County were in fear. However, his crimes would extend as far north as Yolo County and as far south as Orange County, well over 400 miles away. Many residents purchased dogs, deadbolt locks. Some began sleeping with their shotguns. Others took classes to learn how to handle firearms and bought home alarm systems, while some people bought peepholes and used broomsticks to help secure their sliding glass doors. Windows were now closed when families went to bed. Some people opted against going out to late dinners or the movies so that they wouldn't get home too late. Kids that were used to staying out until the sun went down were now asked to stay close to home and be much more aware. Some families even slept all together in the living room. February 1978, only a few years into EAR's spree, a married couple that lived in Rancho Cordova, Brian and Katie Maggiore, were walking their dog. Brian was a military policeman at Mather Air Force Base, and they were walking where 5 of the EAR attacks had recently occurred. Apparently, there was some sort of confrontation. The couple tried to run away, but both were shot to death. In October of 1979, several attacks occurred in Southern California. However, many of these victims were murdered. The attacker in that case was called the original Night Stalker. And decades later, investigators would realize that the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were indeed the same person, thanks to DNA results. It appears that he had moved to the SoCal area and changed his MO to include murdering his rape victims. In 1986, all the madness that started in the mid-70s just seemed to stop. More than 50 rapes, 12 murders, and possibly up to 120 home burglaries. After that, EAR just seemed to hang up his ski mask. Maybe he got scared of being linked to all this with developments that were occurring during that time with DNA analysis, or perhaps something else stopped him. In 2001, after advancements in DNA helped establish the link between the East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker, the Sacramento Bee reported on those new findings. Just one day later, a previous victim of EAR received a call from him saying, "Remember when we played?" and then he hung up. One detective with the Orange County Sheriff's Department suspected that the culprit might be on death row at San Quentin State Prison, and that would explain why the crime stopped. He went there and collected DNA samples, but none of them were a match. In 2016, the FBI and Sacramento's DA office announced a renewed effort to solve the case and offered a $50,000 reward. Fast forward to mid-April 2018. Police had been keeping an eye on a 72-year-old man who reportedly acts much younger, driving his motorcycle at speeds over 100 miles per hour when he's on the freeway, and not always paying attention to the stop signs when he's not. The DNA that Detective Paul Holes so desperately sought was eventually collected when the man threw away an item that the police recovered. They ran the tests, and there were similarities to the East Area Rapist, but the results weren't conclusive. They kept tabs on the man and collected another item that he discarded outside of his home. This time, the match was solid. After more than 40 years, they had located the East Area Rapist in Citrus Heights, California, less than 20 miles outside of the city of Sacramento. On April 24th, around 5 p.m., authorities showed up to arrest the man. His response was, "I have a roast in the oven." We now know the name of the East Area Rapist, Joseph James DeAngelo, and people were right about his experience. He was previously in the U.S. Navy, serving 2 years in Vietnam, and was a former police officer in Exeter and Auburn, California. He lost his job in Auburn when it was discovered that he stole some items from a local drugstore by stuffing them down his pants. At the trial, he denied that he was trying to steal the items, but he was fined $100 and given 6 months probation. I just don't know how you go from being someone enforcing the law to being this type of criminal. It just really blows my mind. How did he avoid his name appearing in over 15,000 pages of case files and several thousand tips? I have no idea. DeAngelo had been married and had 3 children. The marriage ended in 1991. He worked a day job as a truck mechanic at a Save Mart distribution center until he retired. When interviewed, his neighbor described him as an odd guy that had a temper who kept odd hours, mainly staying up at night, but otherwise kept mostly to himself. Several of DeAngelo's family members didn't even know that he was previously a police officer. The 72-year-old who police previously noticed during their surveillance had the energy of a 50-year-old was much different in court. He sat handcuffed to his wheelchair and seemed nearly non-responsive during his arraignment on Friday, April 27, 2018, more than 40 years after starting his notorious spree. He's initially being charged with the murder of Katie and Brian Maggiore, with a firearm of unknown caliber. And the judge notes that that case includes special circumstances of him committing multiple murders. Other counties in the area are preparing their charges against him as well. The first hit that would eventually lead investigators to the East Area Rapist was a familial DNA match, essentially finding a third cousin. They continued working for 4 months, bringing in genealogy experts, and eventually they pinpointed it to D'Angelo. However, investigators' use of GED match could raise legal problems. Before submitting a DNA profile there, a user must check a box on the website acknowledging, quote, that any sample you submit is either your DNA or the DNA of a person whom you are a legal guardian or have obtained authorization to upload their DNA. GED matches terms could give a defense lawyer an opening to get the evidence against D'Angelo tossed out of court, and possibly even all the evidence that came as a result of them making that conclusion. However, other legal experts disagree and think the evidence will likely remain in play. I think it'd be very tough for them to throw that evidence out, considering the crimes that they're looking at this guy for. So I'll be curious to see how that plays out. Either way, the mystery of who is the East Area Rapist, aka the original Night Stalker, aka the Diamond Knot Killer, aka the Golden State Killer, and quite possibly the Visalia Ransacker, has been solved. Case cracked. I'm really happy to hear about this development. This is a case that several people had asked me to cover, and when I looked into it, I always really struggled with it. As you guys know on my show formats, I really try to bring the humanity of the story out, and usually that's by focusing on the victims, letting you guys know what type of people these are that are being harmed. I don't like to spread the narrative of a boogeyman, but here in this case, we know that this isn't a boogeyman. This is a guy that is in chains. He's likely not going to see freedom for the rest of his life. He's 72 years old. It's demystifying what I consider the boogeyman narrative. So that's why I was comfortable kind of covering it finally at this point. Essentially, I couldn't have covered this case unless I made it, a 50 episode series and I went into each of the cases individually, pinpointing the people that were being affected. And believe it or not, I was actually speaking to some people, even attempting to do that, even if I could cover just a few of the cases. However, those things just didn't materialize, didn't quite come together. I was just finding some way to help in this, and I couldn't quite get it right. But thankfully, the authorities have done their work here and found this guy. And this could be one of the most notorious serial killers of recent memory. There's another Night Stalker who I believe might have more people that he murdered than this case, kind of around the same time frame, 80s, maybe a little bit after this. But it's not very often that these cases go on this long like this. And while I do find that I have a lot of cases that I cover here on Case Cracked where decades might have passed and DNA eventually cracks the case, we haven't quite had one for someone that has so many crimes. It still boggles my mind that this is a guy that was serving justice, and during the same time, quite possibly in the middle of the night, he's driving out and doing these terrible things. I believe he was even married for a portion of when some of these crimes were happening again. So kind of in the middle of the night, this guy just goes and takes off and does these insane crimes. So I'm happy he's in custody. I'm happy all these families now have their answer, and everyone can rest a bit easier knowing that this boogeyman has been pulled out of the shadows. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here. I appreciate each and every one of you that watches this channel. Please come back to the Lord and Arch channel tomorrow. I'll have more for you then. Take care.